Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reassessment Without a Retest for GETCA 2022.
Before we begin with today's program, we would just like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and who have gone before us. We acknowledge the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. So good morning or afternoon, everybody. We'll just take a quick second to introduce ourselves. My name is Michael Tarasenko. I work as a secondary science consultant with Edmonton Catholic Schools. So basically this role, the way that it works is I'm hired by the division to work with teachers who are teaching science from grade 7 to 12. I have been in this role, this is my third year in this role, and prior to this, I was a junior high math and science teacher and a high school physics teacher.
And my name is Jennifer Espeo-Harasimiuk, and I am one of the assessment and reporting consultants with Edmonton Catholic Schools. I've been in this role for 3.5 years now. Prior to taking on this challenge, I spent more than 17 years in the classroom, and most of those years as a high school science and sometimes math teacher. So in today's session, we are going to be talking about the idea of reassessment. In a world where awards and scholarships and post-secondary acceptance are contingent upon students getting good grades, it's no surprise at all when students and their parents demand a retest. And as much as teachers may want to grant a retest, however, there are things to consider like time and teacher workload being the biggest obstacles to retesting for teachers. Creating a quality exam is incredibly time consuming and requires great skill. Just think about how many teachers converge for item writing for an Alberta Diploma exam. It's simply not possible for a single classroom teacher to produce that quality of an exam in that short amount of time. So what if instead of a retest, teachers provide a reassessment? After all, the programs of study learner outcomes are about content and skill mastery, not test writing savvy. We are going to be answering the question about how we can assess student learning other than using a test or exam. And we are going to explore a few research-based and practical strategies for quality reassessment. And we hope that you find this very helpful. The first point of discussion is the question, why do we need to reassess in the first place? So I can certainly acknowledge that as a high school and university student, for me, taking a retest was something that happened only if and when my teacher saw that everybody in the room struggled with the content of the test. But of course, that's more than 20 years ago. So educators know a lot more about how we learn now, the science of learning, and the research-backed strategies that maximize learning. And there's some other considerations to think about as well.
Yeah, and one thing we need to definitely consider is the fact that, not everybody learns at the same rate, right? There are differences at the rate at which people learn, and we need to acknowledge that. And I think that one great analogy that that Jen proposed for this presentation is the idea of popcorn kernels, right? That when some of the kernels, they pop right away, right? And some of the kernels take a longer time. Sometimes you got to put them back in the microwave for a bit for them to pop. And I think that our students are very similar in that regard, right? And the current kind of real rigid structure of one and done testing, rather than meeting the needs of students who are learning at different rates, it puts people in categories, and it says that, oh, I'm a math person because I get it right away, and I'm not really a math person, right? It takes me a while to get it. Whereas the strategies we're going to be sharing with you today will hopefully address some of those concerns so that we can bring more equity into our classroom. And so another thing too we have to consider is with teaching in Alberta, right? We are in an outcomes-based learning environment. That's the intention of the Alberta Program of Studies. And so what we were striving for, then this is what Jen alluded to earlier as well, was the fact that, we're looking to achieve content mastery. And that whatever grade we assign to students should reflect their level of mastery on those particular outcomes, right? If they need more time to learn, the kind of grading and assessment structures we often have in place don't really allow for the grading of mastery. It's just the collecting of points along the way, right? So we should really look at reframing our assessment structures as opportunities for students to showcase their learning and their mastery. Another thing we need to look at as well is the fact that our TQS, the document that defines our professional responsibility as teachers, right? So this isn't just talking about what we should be doing or what should we be striving for. There is a published document from Alberta Education that says that a teacher will apply a current and comprehensive repertoire of effective planning, instruction, and assessment practices, right? Our assessment and teaching practices should not be emblematic of something that happened 100 years ago. We should be keeping up on current research, and we should be looking at how can we best meet the needs of our students while also then teaching the outcomes of the program of study.
So if we're considering our popcorn analogy and all of those learning differences that we have in our classrooms, and the fact that in Alberta we teach and should be assessing student knowledge and understanding and skill based on these outcomes. When students show mastery of content, logic dictates that their grades reflect that level of mastery, even if they do not demonstrate their knowledge, understanding, or skill at the same time or in exactly the same way as their classmates. We're talking about giving students credit for what they know, even if they learn it a little bit later than others. And so this whole reassessment is you didn't get it on the first try, that's okay. We're going to have some more learning here, and then you'll try again. And another idea here with giving students credit for what they know, it flies in the face of the point system, specifically because the point system is rather demotivating. Think about it. If you struggle, I think about my Science 10s, right? Science 10, first quiz in their first semester of high school, they're in a whole new environment. Often they don't do so great the first time. And the early failure in a point system where we do averages, it actually punishes the student for having struggles at the beginning, and it's really hard to come back from that. And we also need to think about being mindful not to punish students multiple times for one type of error as well. So it's pretty common in math and science if we keep on taking off a point here and a point there for rounding errors or significant figures. Really, it's just the student is making the same mistake. They're not showing less and less understanding. They're just being consistent with the mistake. So, why reassess? We really want to make sure we're giving students credit for what they know. So if it's logical, and I might even say ethical, to provide reassessment based on learning differences and mastery or outcomes-based grading, why don't we do it? Why do we as teachers struggle to provide retests? It's not because we don't care about our students. It's not because we don't understand the need to give students credit for what they know. There are some things that are standing in the way here.
The way that we try to frame these strategies is more of a continuation of the learning and assessment process, right? That, we took the test, we took one measurement, right? And now let's make some adjustments. Let's have some discussions. It's just creating not just more opportunities, but a much larger opportunity for students to continue to show what they know.
And it gives them time to learn some more as well. But if we're thinking about what the problems might be, the first thing I'm thinking of is workload for sure. It's time consuming and difficult to create a good, reliable, valid multiple choice numerical response test that that stands in the way for me, definitely. I also think about timing. You know, if we want this to be more than just a second chance to write the exact same test again, if we want there to be some learning before the first assessment and then the reassessment, then when are we going to do this? When do we reteach? When do we do that retest? Are we doing it after school at lunchtime? I know at my previous school, we had flex attached to lunchtime. So basically I just had an extra long flex block and ate during that. You know, when are we going to even do all that work to make a new test? And then again, we also have to think about, you know, what is the gamble here? You know, when I first embarked upon this whole idea of reassessment, I can be honest, I didn't really think it through. And the first couple of times it was a gamble. I didn't really see students' marks skyrocket after a retest. And sometimes it was very much that, oh, well, I don't have to study for this one. I'm going to throw this one, find out what's on the test, and then no worries, I'll just do the retest. So retests and retakes, they shouldn't really be another spin of the roulette wheel, right? It should be, you know, something where they improve, but if they're going to improve, then somehow, some way, it has to be a situation for them to put in the work to master that material.
And it's definitely a gamble. I mean, it's scary to do the new and different thing, right? It's scary to do the thing that's different than the teacher across the hall, or, you know, different than the thing you did last semester. And the first time you do it, it's not going to go perfectly. And I think that, you know, just like we try to promote a growth mindset with our students, saying, oh, you're not going to get it right on the first try, keep trying. You know, we as professionals, we need to strive to have that mindset as well, right? When you first try this, and any teacher I've talked to that has really tried, I think the pandemic has really, we'll try not to cite the pandemic too many times in this presentation, but, you know, one thing that the pandemic has really opened up is a lot of teachers, you know, especially going virtual, is looking at their own assessment practices and their teaching practices and saying, you know, well, maybe there's a different way that I can do this. You know, oh, my assessment practice, they're not working in a virtual setting. How can I do things differently? And now that we're going back in person, we're looking at, well, now how can I take those lessons I learned from remote learning and incorporate some of that into my classroom, right? And the thing that we're seeing is we're seeing more and more teachers saying, you know, this one and done testing thing is, what is it actually measuring, right? And I want to explore some new and different options, and we have to have that kind of space professionally to try out different things and see how they go. So what we're going to be looking at next is we're just going to be highlighting a few strategies that we encourage you to try out in your classroom, right? So how can we overcome these major problems with retests so we can still reassess our students, you know, we can assess their skills. And so we're going to be looking at 3 reassessment strategies that you can implement in your classroom as presented today, or, you know, feel free to modify these strategies to fit your classroom. Don't feel like this is some kind of a prescription recipe for success. Every classroom has a different culture. You have your own professional judgment as well, right? And part of the kind of the mantra of this presentation is the idea that we need to be bringing more professional judgment into the classroom, right? And making things less rigid and more open to interpretation. And so these are just some strategies. This is not a quick fix, all-in-one package, right? But the big idea here, the take-home message, that we want to consider this idea of reassessment as part of your assessment plan.
All right, so the first strategy is called mastery quizzes. And the idea here is that students establish mastery of the content before the unit test or final project or something along those lines. So this whole idea of mastery quizzes actually stemmed from the work of Benjamin Bloom. So you've probably heard of Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom also developed the idea of mastery learning. And his idea was something that to many of us seems pretty basic now, but he outlined this strategy in which teachers organize important concepts and skills into small chunks of time, so 5 to 10 school days, let's say, and then teachers administer a formative assessment. And this formative assessment identifies student growth, areas for growth and student strengths. And then the teacher provides feedback, timely feedback, so that students can use to learn from and correct their work. Students are using that feedback to close the learning gap, and then they take a second formative assessment, a parallel assessment. It's going to address the same learning goals, but slightly different questions or problems, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't going to seem very, very new, but as educational researchers have dug deeper and built upon this is when we get to this whole idea of the questions for feedback. So this work came from Timperley and Hattie to extend this work. And basically they're saying if we're going to give feedback, students need to be able to do something with it, and they need to be able to answer these questions in order to do something with it. So they need to know where they're going, what is their learning goal. They need to know, how am I going? So how is it going? Track their progress. What are those gaps? Identify those gaps. And then they need to have the skills to decide where to next. They need to be able to close those learning gaps and continue to progress. So with mastery quizzes, it helps them with all of these things. They emphasize mastery learning as opposed to the grades, and the students are getting feedback to close those gaps. Teachers can also use information from these mastery quizzes to formatively for their own practice, right? To determine if and when reteaching is needed. And talking about how the science of learning, how the brain works. Mastery quizzes also serve as retrieval practice as well, and that is going to reinforce learning. So as your students do mastery quizzes, the important part from it really is what they're doing with it after they've done it, right? So this is something that I've done in my classroom with Biology 20, actually did with all my classes. But, I use the same quiz that I had always used. So typical little quiz or test. And I just had my students write it as usual. And I took it in and I marked it. I put my X's and check marks and question marks and all of that jazz. And then when I handed it back, I gave it with this template here. So in this template, I put in the title of the quiz and I summarized my blueprint essentially. So here you see the title of the quiz, and then the blueprint has the outcomes in there because we're in an outcomes-based educational system here in Alberta. So I put all of those in there, and then the student puts in their quiz. So the name of the student, obviously I can't reveal, but this is what she got. She got her 8 out of 12. And then after that, she would go through her test. The students looked through their test from a position of success first. So if we consider Rosenshine's principles of instruction, one of those major principles is that we need to have high rates of success. We need to highlight it. We need to have early success as well to help our students with their learning. The students looked at the questions they got correct, and part of that learning, part of that review is being able to match what does the question say to what was a summary that I had put at the beginning, as what were the outcomes there. And then, whichever ones the kiddos had trouble with, they weren't very consistent in demonstrating proficiency here, they would highlight those ones. So I know I just typed in, I still have the paper copy, but I just typed it in so it's easy to read. But even though she had a 5 and 6, she did 2 correct questions here. I asked her about that, and she said, Mrs. H, I put in 5 and 6 here anyway, because when I go to the ones that I got wrong, it was the scientific inquiry skills that I got wrong. So for her, that was enough to be inconsistent. So after they do this part, then they take a look at what were their gaps. They look at the questions they got wrong, the associated topic, and they engage in reviewer dialogue with a classmate. Most of my students, when we did this particular one, because it was one of the first ones we did, they actually were very uncomfortable with talking to their classmates about it. They thought, but isn't that cheating? So it took the first semester that I did this, I think it took until like the fourth quiz probably that we did this. This student, she did have a partner. They identified exactly what were their errors in thinking, and they related it to the topic. So what was it that they needed to fix? And then they got really specific as well. And then they start planning their next steps. So this part is where they actually they do the self-monitor, they make a commitment, they write a plan for success. And of course, I'm there to help support them. So she decided that she was going to come to every extra help session prior to the unit test. So I saw her almost every day. And on Wednesdays, she brought her partner from another class, her study buddy, and they practiced their retrieval practice all the time. And then before the unit test, because I wasn't going to give a retest on this quiz, I just wanted her to learn it and reassess. So she said, I want a practice quiz. I just want a practice quiz just to make sure I've got it. And it was really wonderful to see because she did improve. She knew it better, and then she rocked that unit test. And I really liked this because it was a great dynamic that it evolved in my classroom, and it was a way in for me to talk to my students about, just rereading your notes or rewriting your notes isn't actually the most effective way to study. Let's look at some other ways. So this is something that you can use with your students. And just so you know, we will have a link to the template for this form in the description, and you can take it, change it however you like. Make sure that it works for you.
Yeah, there's definitely some things you mentioned there, Jen, that I feel are really important to reemphasize. This idea of we're going to have to teach our students to do these things, right? Like it's going to take a couple of kicks at the can to kind of build up this culture in your classroom of this. And I think that I find in my experience that if you come out of the gates as a teacher and you say, listen, guys, we're going to be trying this semester, this is something new. So kind of bear with me. I find students can be fairly patient with the process as long as you come out and be honest about it and saying, I'm trying to do this and, in your best interest to make sure that you guys have every fair opportunity to demonstrate what you know. And I find students are pretty open to these ideas, right? And the students that aren't interested, I mean, they won't participate and their experience won't be that much different than it was before. But I think for the students that are open to this process, they can really benefit them. And so, just a few considerations here. One is that these mastery quizzes are, what we call formative in nature. So they typically do not count toward the grade, or they minimally count toward the grade. So there is no retest per se. This is all just part of the learning process, right? If students are responsible to show learning prior to the unit test, so typically this is going to lead up to a higher stakes summative assessment at the end of a unit or end of a chapter, or however your course is organized. So the thing you have to consider is what routines, procedures, and expectations might you employ to ensure students show that they're ready to write the unit test. And one thing I love about this strategy is that not only are students articulating what they don't know, but they're articulating what they know, right? And so they're saying, especially for those of us that use machine scored exams where it's multiple choice quizzes, you have students getting questions right, and they don't necessarily completely understand why they got the question right. They could have guessed, or just they have enough kind of test wiseness so that they can kind of whittle their way to the answer. But to actually get them to sit down and explain, do you understand this? Why did you put B for number one, and why is that the correct answer? You'd be surprised to find that a lot of students can't necessarily articulate that, right? They're just, well, because it's the right answer, right? And that's about as deep as it goes. Another thing to consider is your final exam cumulative? Like, do you have a final exam, right? What does that look like? Jen and I have both presented on on the concept of, do you really need to have a final exam? What are some alternative ways that you can have a final snapshot of your students' learning that doesn't involve a high stakes exam? Right? So feel free to reach out to us, right, if you have any questions regarding that. And so if it is cumulative, in what ways might you use it as a reassessment of content from prior units, right? Because again, because we're mastery based, then once a student has demonstrated mastery of a particular outcome, have you demonstrated that you can explain this or define this? And yes, you have. Great. We don't need to belabor that point any longer, right? This isn't just saying that quizzes don't count for grades. There just needs to be a process of assessment and feedback along the way. So you can't just say, oh, these quizzes don't count, only the unit exam matters. Everything matters along the way, and it's just leading up to that unit exam, which is going to be a culmination of the work that you've done. And don't forget that just because something doesn't quote unquote count in your grade book doesn't mean that you can't still report it in your grade book, right? You can report everything you're doing without having it count. For instance, like this one teacher that we worked with. This is an ECSD, a high school science teacher that we've had the pleasure of working with. She's really been playing in the sandbox of assessment, right? And this is something that she does where she has students write short quizzes about once a week or so. And these quizzes are reported on a 2-point scale. And essentially what she puts in the gradebook, this is not for quote unquote marks, right? But she is reporting it in her gradebook, basically saying if you got a 2, then you're good. If you have a 1, then you're getting there. If you have a 0, that means that you've not completed the assessment. And so students analyze, they fix their quiz, and they resubmit it. And then that mark, right, that score is then amended in the gradebook. They do not count towards the final grade until after the unit is complete in this case. Quizzes must be fixed before the unit exam to ensure mastery of the content before the unit has finished.
The next option for reassessment, as opposed to retest, is this 3-2-1 test review. And this was found on the leadforward.com website, and we've modified it just a wee bit. That social emotional learning has a lot to do with self-monitoring and metacognition. And this is so important because those things boost our learning. And I think that, last year during that extremely uncertain time with the pandemic, and we were going online and then back in class and then isolating, etc. As students and teachers and administrators grew in their knowledge and experience and proficiency with using SEL tools, they also began to acknowledge that SEL is not the fluff lots of people like to kind of brush it off as, but extremely effective to learning. So let's take a look at how this works here. It works because it helps students learn from their mistakes. So you get to, get them to learn from a graded assignment or test. And so they start to own their learning. And the part that I like the best is that it kind of gets the kids to highlight what it is that they need me as the teacher to do to help them learn it better. This sort of strategy, it's a very good idea to model the strategy during instruction prior to the test, that students are familiar and comfortable with it, and they can focus their energy on demonstrating their knowledge and understanding and skills on the test rather than trying to remember what the 3-2-1 test review strategy is all about. And of course, you can also remind them as they're writing the test, but this is how it works. Okay, so during the test, they will put in a plus sign next to the question that they're very confident, I got this one right. They put a check mark next to ones that they think, I got to check it. I think it's good, but I better double check. And then a minus sign to say, I think I missed this one. And so this is the metacognition here. This is where they're thinking about their thinking, and they are keeping a record of it because they're not going to remember once they get it back. Okay, so once they've done all this, they hand in their test, and then you mark it as the teacher, and then students receive it back, and they compare their plus, minuses, and checks to what they actually got right and wrong. So as students work, they are going to select 3 difficult questions that they got correct. They're going to select 2 questions they thought they were going to get correct, but they actually didn't get correct. And then 1 difficult question they need to have their teacher go through in the class. They do that individually. Then they pair up with a thinking partner. So you can decide how the partnering works here. If you're going to get students who have similar grades, you can put those 2 kids together. If you have students who want to choose their own, it's your decision. But when they're working with their thinking partners, then they're going to talk together and justify why they got them correct, why you got those 3 difficult questions correct. And this is one of those things where you have to make sure that they're actually choosing the difficult ones, because these are the ones that they should be most proud of. Oh, I didn't think I'd get it, but there I go. The questions that they miss, they're going to help each other correct those. Okay, and then that 1 difficult question, they are going to say what it is, and they really want you, the teacher, to go through in class. So after they have corrected those questions with their thinking partner and they've selected 1 question that they want you to go through, then you're going to take those 3, 2, 1 test review papers back in and find out what were the most common number 1 questions. What were the ones ranked as number 1? And you work with the whole class to review those common ones. Okay, then we're going to have they're going to have students analyze their strengths and mistakes, and the students will see and hear each other's thinking, the teacher's thinking, and they can clarify when necessary or verify when it's appropriate. And then after that, the class can work independently to summarize what they learned and how to avoid mistakes in the future. And they write all of this down. Then the teacher may take this in and use the quality and demonstration of that summary to amend the test mark by reassessing the students' understanding of the questions they got wrong. And this part isn't from the Lead Forward website, leadforward.com website. I actually added this one at the end because when first bringing this to teachers were like, well, how do I make this into a retest so that their grade is better? So we know that, in the secondary world in Alberta, we still rely on making a grade. That's what's expected in Alberta education. And so, we can't ever really take our eye off that particular ball. So this is one strategy that you could do with that.
Yeah, and there are definitely options that you can consider when it comes to amending the original mark. So this definitely one thing you have to consider is, your own professional judgment and your own comfort level as well, right? The culture of your classroom and how you want to kind of set it up. And so these are just options, but one possible option is to look at each of the number 2 questions that students that you feel have proficiently analyzed and corrected, and then assigning a point to that, right? So that's a way of then adding points to the original score. Or you could add half a point for all proficiently analyzed and corrected questions, right? It's completely up to you. One thing to consider is what other methods might you choose to amend the mark on the original exam. One thing we really have to think about when we're talking about this term professional judgment is we have to consider that we as teachers, we tend to spend a lot of time and energy creating systems that remove professional judgment from the grading system, right? We create multiple choice tests, we create numerical response questions, we create these kind of bulletproof rubrics that are essentially checklists that, oh, you have this and this and this, you get this and this and this mark. And then I don't have to do any thinking, right? I just have to go through the algorithm, and then the algorithm generates the grade, right? And then you can't blame the teacher for the grade, because it's, that's the test. The test gave you your grade. It's the algorithm that did it, right? And we want to appear, and by doing this, we try to appear impartial or unbiased, right? It's easy to hide behind these algorithms, but one thing that we really have to think about is the fact that as much as you may consider the system or the algorithm to be unbiased, but a biased person built the algorithm, there are biases built into these algorithms, right? We're biasing it towards students who get it on the first try. We're biasing it towards students who don't feel any kind of anxiety around testing and come in cool and comfortable and ready to go. And so any student who isn't, that is disadvantaged by this system.
I think of a conversation I had with a junior high school science teacher a few weeks ago, and she was really excited. She found a way to do reassessment without a retest. And it was somewhere along these lines, and it turned into a huge conversation in the staff room one morning about, well, why would we only, make it half a point, or why would we make it a full point? And the conversation that came around that was very interesting, because it went back and forth between, well, what's fair for a mark, and what does a mark really represent in the first place? So again, as Mike said at the beginning, this is going to be something that we don't have any quick fix answers to. There's not a one size fits all. Please do consider what's going to work for you in your classroom and in your department and your school.
And we have to consider what the definition of the word fair is as well, right? The teaching, I was a high school physics teacher, and I think there aren't that many subjects that make students cry like physics does, right? And I'll never forget having students who I would have conversations with them about physics, and it's very clear that they understand the concepts, and they get it, they work really hard, and then on test day, for one reason or another, they kind of tank it, right? And as a teacher, because you've set the system up, right, you can really only just shrug your shoulders because you've set that precedent, right? And say, well, I'm sorry, but that's just kind of the way it goes. And that doesn't feel very fair to me, to that student, who I know in my heart of hearts through conversations with this person knows how to do the physics, but for whatever reason, they just didn't get it on the test. And that's not fair to them either, right? And so we want to make sure that we're looking at an equitable system that enables everybody to engage with the assessment process in a way that they can get the stuff out of them, and make sure that the teacher can see that, yes, I know that you know it, and now I've gathered evidence to indicate that. And so we've this is just an example of the template that is available to you. As Jen mentioned, we're linking to any kind of relevant documents or websites or anything like that will all be linked, so you don't have to worry about that. Feel free, obviously, to, we're going to be submitting an editable version of this template, but this is just one example of a way that you can use this 3-2-1 test review strategy in your classroom.
All right, so now we're on our last strategy. It's called the two-stage exam. It comes from the Carl Wieman Science Initiative at UBC, Science Education Initiative at UBC. And it's a strategy that's been used extensively in higher education throughout North America. However, it's also been used successfully at the high school level, including Edmonton Catholic schools. So let's just go through why it works and what it's all about here. So the two-stage exam gives students insight into a variety of perspectives and methods from classmates. We're really leveraging classmates as as learning resources here. And it gives students time to review their understanding between stages, because after all, we're looking at learning here. That's the point of learning, and measuring the learning is using these tests. And as the students do this, they're creating their own sense of ownership in learning from these graded assessments. And it solidifies the learning and understanding as well, because in the second stage, just like in the 3-2-1 test review strategy, in the second stage of this strategy, students are talking to each other. When we're learning a complex subject matter, no matter what the subject is, it is like learning a new language. And if we're thinking about how do we learn language best, just think about how babies learn language. First, they hear it. Then they practice making the sounds, and they do the speech. And then they start reading and writing it down. So this whole 2-stage exam thing, that speech part, the speaking and listening part, is a key component to the learning and understanding. And I know one of our teachers is doing the scratch card variation, Mike.
Yeah, there's look out on this guy named Thomas Adunich. He's actually has submitted a session for GETCA as well, where he talks about his process in more detail. And part of his strategy involves these scratch cards. And so we're not going to be really getting into it today. He does a good job of speaking to it. We have included a link to a scratch card variation of this. And essentially what it involves is students, either individually or collaboratively, they have these scratch cards where you scratch what you believe the answer is, and it lets you know if it's correct or incorrect. There's analog versions of this that you can, it involves some preparation, and you might have to order these scratch cards. There's also digital versions as well. And so we do encourage you to check out these strategies. And it's kind of a neat thing, and definitely check out Tom's session on it, because I think it's something that you might find interesting.
So the first part of the 2-stage exam is just like any regular traditional test. Students sit in their desk, they complete the exam individually, the teacher collects and marks the exam, and they don't provide a mark to the student, but they do record that mark unpublished in a spreadsheet somewhere. So in Edmonton Catholic, we use PowerTeacher Pro. Other places use FreshGrade, doesn't matter, just don't publish it. Don't tell the kids the mark. Okay, and the machine scored and written portions are also recorded separately. And then the second part is that the students receive the machine scored portion of their exam responses back. And this is the part where they get to work collaboratively. So this is our collaborative testing stage, where students work in groups to compare their responses. So they double check their work against each other's. They discuss those discrepancies. They change their responses based on the dialogue and their new reasoning. In some classrooms, we see, groups of 2 or 3 or 4 students working together. I was quite surprised by this. I definitely thought that it would just be, the smartest kid in the class and then all the kids sitting around them. But that actually, I haven't seen that at all. And so they changed their responses and they hand it back in, and then the teacher scans it again. Almost every teacher that I've worked with, they say, okay, well, that final mark for this exam is going to be some combination of the individual and the team score. So in one chemistry classroom, I know the teacher has it as 85% of the test score is of the individual score, and then 15% is the collaborative testing score.
Okay, so you'll hear some arguments, against approaches such as this one, or even the previous ones that we were talking about. Jen already kind of alluded to, she was surprised that the kids didn't just huddle around the quote unquote smart kid and try to get their answers out of them, right? But I think that, we have to, you do have to monitor the students as they're doing this, right? I think that, some walking around is necessary, some priming the students, saying, listen, guys, this is for your learning, and, You know, if you're just going and getting the answers for somebody, like, then there's no point in doing this. And as a teacher, like, if you're seeing that that's what your students are doing, then you need to change what you're doing and you pull the plug on it. Like that's what you have the power to do, right?
Well, I think there you'd also have to consider what is the classroom culture that I've established that is supporting it or hindering that kind of discussion as well, right? Like if the classroom culture is, okay, listen, if everybody brings in 5 cans of soup for the next food drive, I'll give you 5 extra points on your test. Like that classroom culture is more about points collection and less about the learning type of thing. But yeah, lots of that's one lesson I learned myself. What kind of conversations am I having in my class to build it up?
Yeah, and so it kind of begs the question of, you know, what is the goal of assessment, right? Are we, as Jen mentioned, just collecting points, right? What are we grading, right? Are we grading students' knowledge and skills? Are we just playing this game of school where we're just grading students' ability to be compliant with the rules, right? You know, and at the end of the day, you know, as much as we're giving these students quote unquote second chances or extensions on their assessments or whatever you want to call it, we need to make sure that the kids are working for it, right? Like these strategies are still ensuring that students are working for this. So it's not really cheating if the kids have to do more work. Another argument we'll hear is that, well, but students need to learn responsibility and accountability and, you know, and well, yeah, but who are they accountable to, right? If you have a very rigid assessment structure in your classroom, then the thing the students are accountable to is their teacher, right? And the content is an afterthought. And how can we kind of change that paradigm and teach students to be accountable to the content, right? And to their learning as opposed to the teacher. Another argument too is, you know, this idea of, well, we need to prepare these kids for post-secondary institutions in the real world, because when they go to the real world, they don't get second chances. And my answer to that is, yeah, you do, right? For sure you do, right? You know, this idea of one and done practice in the real world doesn't really happen, right? One great example of this is, you know, recently as consultants, we need to prepare reports for our boss, and then the boss submits the reports to the board of trustees, you know, just to kind of report on what we're doing as a department, right? And, you know, me being one of the science people, we prepare a report and then we submit it to the boss, and then the boss says, yeah, that's good, but could you change X, Y, and Z? And so we change X, Y, and Z, and then we send it back. And then they say, okay, but, you know, could you maybe just tweak this and that? Okay, sure, we tweak this and that. And then we submit it back, and then it's good to go, right? That's how the real world works, right? Our boss is not interested in firing us based on one report that's a little insufficient, and is certainly not interested in collecting the report and saying, well, you had one chance at the report, we're going to submit it as is, because it's not in their best interest to report something that's not great, right? And so, you know, the real world has a lot of examples of this back and forth, right? Of you do it one way, your boss gives you feedback, you take another shot at it, right? And the final argument, which we don't really have an easy answer for, is that it still takes time. When am I going to do this? My instructional schedule is jam-packed. I teach junior high and I have 7 different subjects. And I guess our response to this is that we don't have a very clear-cut response, and just to kind of do whatever you can and whatever fits in your schedule. And, you know, do you do this with all your quizzes or your tests, or do you choose just the high stakes ones, or do you choose just the low stakes ones, right? You know, find a way to make it work for you. And the goal of these strategies is to further content acquisition. It's to increase equity in your classroom, right? And building a culture of this in your classroom in any kind of a capacity we feel is a change for the positive.
So I think that no easy answer bit, the no one size fits all answer here, is really important to acknowledge. I know that it was definitely something I had to consider, you know, in 2014 when I went back to work after my my last maternity leave, I really had to think about when am I going to do all of this stuff, because I had 3 kids. They were all under 5, and I couldn't be spending hours at home doing that. I wanted to be a mom and do my thing. So that was something that I had to consider. When am I going to do this? Then I also had to think about what am I going to let go of? What low yield strategies, low yield routines and procedures in my classroom that I've been doing for years and years, what do I have to let go of to really honor this? So that's one tip that I don't have here on this slide, but it just came to me now. The other tips for reassessment success in your classroom are along those same lines, things to think about, especially with those arguments in mind. So the first is to make those assessment policies and procedures clear. Write it down. Make sure your stakeholders are aware. Don't do what my job share partner and I did and have your principal walk into your room 2 weeks before the final exams and say, what are you doing? What's happening? That was a mistake. He was unaware, and he had to deal with a parent. It all worked out well in the end, but we could have saved some headaches there. And anticipate the questions and concerns. So really, if you're inclined, have an FAQ response sheet or some sort of link on your Google Classroom ready to go, so that if anyone wants to know, hey, what's going on and what's the rationale, you're ready and you don't have to feel caught unawares.
You can even, sorry to interject, but you can even print this off and put it up in your classroom, right? Like having, it's kind of elementary style to have, what we do in our classroom, blah, 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 bullet points. But I mean, if this is something that you're doing, put it up for everybody to see, right? And that way students and parents and all stakeholders will be aware of what's happening.
Exactly. And like, really put your money where your mouth is. You have to model it. You have to practice. You have to remind your students that this is what's going on. And if this is something that's going to be completely new to you, as it was for me in 2014, doing it as a job share situation, I found my partner and I, we really had to be compassionate with our students and with ourselves, right? We hadn't done it like this before. We hadn't job shared before. We hadn't done reassessment quite like this before. So we had to be forgiving and compassionate when we all, including the students, made mistakes, and not just forgiving, but we also had to find ways to learn from it and grow. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your policies and procedures. And then the last one is really watch your language, right? If the goal is to emphasize learning, stop talking about grades so much. Stop talking about grades so much. Don't use it as a carrot or a stick. I know it's easy to use it as a carrot or a stick, right? But it really does undermine the purpose of why students are in school, and that is to learn and grow and gain some skills and knowledge and understanding to help them in life. And really, when we're thinking about these tips for reassessment success, you're establishing a culture of learning, not points gathering, of learning. And these are things that, it's going to look different from classroom to classroom, but the principles are the same.
And it's going to take more than one shot at getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a process of working with students to see what works, at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, having that conversation with them about the process, gathering that feedback so that, going back to Jen's first point about anticipating questions and concerns, as these things come up, you log them so that you can, when you take another shot at this, then you can address those questions and concerns before they happen.
Exactly. So if you're interested in learning more about the ideas of reassessment and the principles that we spoke of today, we have 2 books to recommend. The first one, the Understanding How We Learn book, is a very quick read. It's an easy read, and it talks about the cognitive science. It talks about retrieval practice, spaced practice, interleaving, etc. And it really talks about, you know, why these things work and why kids will push back sometimes, right? Kids will push back because it feels hard, but then we have to use that language, watch our language, build that culture of talking about, okay, I know it's difficult, but I mean, if it wasn't, then why do you need a teacher to help you, right? You want some difficulties here. So that's one of the books that we recommend. And the other one is written by a Canadian, Tom Schimmer. It's called Grading from the Inside Out. And this is talking about the standards-based, or in Alberta we call it the outcomes-based mindset, and making sure that student assessment is accurate and really giving students credit for what they know. Mike, do you want to talk about these Twitter handles here?
They're definitely, like, as an educator, Twitter for me has been a super valuable resource for reaching out to people in the educational field and really getting out there and making friends and learning. And so some of these handles, you see Tom Schimmer's in there. He's the author of Grading from the Inside Out. That first one you see there, that Effortful Edu one, is a guy named Blake Harvard, who has some really great strategies on, you know, for those of us that we are using multiple choice tests, we are training our students to do multiple choice tests, but what are some strategies that we can use with students that uses that framework of a multiple choice test, but gets students to actually talk about their learning in a more meaningful way. There's Joanna Brown. She's a chemistry teacher from, I can't remember where, she's in the United States. Which state escapes me? Is it Michigan?
I think it's Michigan, yeah.
She is a very vocal advocate of the ungrading movement, right? And so, you know, we are unfortunately tied to grades. However, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from these practices. And so I definitely encourage you to check them out. Do you want to speak to Katie White and ACE that test, Jen?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So Katie White is an assessment guru. I believe she's from Saskatchewan. I had the pleasure of seeing her speak in person before the pandemic. And she is also a member of the Canadian Assessment for Learning Network. And she has some great ideas about assessment, and she really has a knack for just making you think in a very gentle and compassionate way. And she does have at least one book out there called Softening the Edges of educational assessment. So go check out that book as well. ACE That Test is the Twitter handle for the learning scientists. And so the learning scientists talk about the understanding how we learn. And the Cult of Pedagogy is next. That's Jennifer Gonzalez. She's from the States. She is a language arts teacher for secondary. And I know at first when I heard that, I thought, oh, but I don't teach that, so that's not going to be worth my time. But it is definitely worth my time, even as a math and science teacher. A lot of what she shares out there so generously. All of these people are quite generous with what they share to help teachers out in their classrooms. It's dynamite stuff. And then the last one there is Mr. Ken O'Connor. He is a longtime assessment guru. He's written the book How to Grade for Learning. And that is a book that I know that all of the consultants in Edmonton Catholic schools and our high school APs received quite a few years ago now. But that fourth edition has really been helpful in making sure that our assessment practice is accurate and moving forward.
I can definitely speak to that Understanding How We Learn book, that it has, you know, it was introduced to me actually by Jen. She introduced it to me early on in my consultant work, and it's definitely been like the backbone of my work when it comes to instructional practice and instructional professional development with teachers. And it's really gotten me thinking and opened a lot of doors for me regarding, you know, looking at different ways of how can we teach, as they say, you know, bell to bell and wall to wall in our classrooms. So let's kind of wrap it up here. Feel free to contact us. Our email addresses are on the screen. we'd be happy to have conversations with you regarding this at any point. If you have any questions, if you're looking at sharing your work with us and kind of some tips and tricks, we'd be more than happy to hear from you.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your convention.
Thank you very much, everybody.